Hello friends, welcome back to another week of moving my body with grace. This week's video is going to be in basically a different format because I only walked 2 days, and showing you clips of me walking 2 days is kind of silly for the entire week. And I think I'm going to spend the time chatting with you and talking about what led up to this week, how this week went, and what my plan going forward is. It is going to include talking about weight loss and health and mental states, in case you need to know that ahead of time. So let's get into it. So going back quite a ways, when we first started using Lumen, for the first month and a half, I was losing weight. And you have that kind of high in energy about learning a new system and figuring it out and finding recipes and all that fun stuff. But at some point it stopped, and probably for the next month and a half, I didn't lose weight. And I didn't really realize it. It didn't really sink in that it really had stopped until we got closer to our trip that we just went on, because the trip was really the motivating factor, kind of the goal that I was working towards. Because I was going to be meeting family I had never met before, and I wanted to feel good in the dress I had bought, all those fun things. So as the trip approached and I started evaluating everything, I started realizing I'm not losing weight, and this is frustrating. I did a little bit of math, and I figured out that before I left on the trip, I was putting in basically 7 hours a week on exercise and movement. And that included daily walks, stretching time, and also the weightlifting I had added in. So if you compare what I was doing in the beginning of Lumen to right before the trip, my exercise had definitely increased. But in reflecting on all the data and information I had collected in the Lumen app, I realized their whole thing is don't count calories, count macros, and go according to your macro budget and you should be fine. But if you give me a budget, I usually try to meet it exactly. I'm that type of person, and that usually ends up overspending, whether it be money or the actual budget, because I'm trying to meet it exactly. And of course, if you meet one category exactly, then you're either over or under in other ones and all that fun stuff. So in reflection, about half of the days I was over their budget, and about half the days I was at or under. But there wasn't like a huge difference between having more over days in the last month and a half compared to the first month and a half and that sort of thing. But I had, before the trip, had drawn the conclusion that, okay, rather than just only looking at macros, I do need to look at the overall calorie count, and maybe that will help. And I had started trying to normalize that, and I still wasn't seeing any difference, which was frustrating. So during the trip, there was lots of good things. It was very pretty. It was nice to be out in nature. It was wonderful having time to connect to family and meet new family. I also started drawing again, which is always a good thing. But there was also a good handful of negative things that happened, starting with me forgetting a piece to my sleep app, which meant every single night I was not getting good sleep. And every morning I was waking up with either a headache or a full-blown migraine. I was also having issues with the elevation, so my heart was racing. I was having trouble breathing, that sort of thing. And all that accumulated into 2 panic attacks before bed and a couple of the nights. So by the time I got home, I was very, 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 very tired. I use a sleep app called Rise, which tracks your sleep. And it's based on the premises of sleep debt. So when you first use it, it spends some time calculating how much sleep that you do best on. So it says I do best on 9.5 hours. And then it tracks you over 2-week periods and says if you're doing well or if you have a deficit. So by the time I got back home, I had a 14-hour deficit of sleep, which is very high. So it's just another way of measuring and tracking things and just telling me, yes, confirming, yes, you really are tired. And as soon as I got home, my period started, which I'm grateful it didn't happen during the trip, but it was just kind of an exclamation mark on the whole thing of you're exhausted, you need a rest. And I remember the day after we got back, I had so much exhaustion. By the afternoon, I took a 3-hour nap, and I was still able to go to sleep on time that evening and sleep through the night. So very tired. I did make some notes down here, so that's why I keep glancing down at my screen. But along with all the exhaustion, when I came back, all the frustration with the weight loss was still there. And I guess you'd say it was accentuated also with the idea of restarting everything and jumping back in. And when I was coming from a place of complete exhaustion, of course I didn't want to do it. But then on top of it, it was like, okay, these are all the reasons I don't want to do it. Basically, it wasn't working before. Why would I do it again? And especially when I started adding up all the time I was putting into it and all the focus and energy, going, is that really a good way to be spending my time if it's not working? So there was definitely a resistance to doing the things I was doing before I left. I also basically got my thoughts frozen. I wasn't able to think, wasn't able to process things. I was checking out a lot. Honestly, I can't tell you how I spent the week because there was a lot of time when I wasn't mentally there. On the positive side, I did continue painting, so that was good. But I have had periods of depression in my life when I've spent months, if not years, checked out. And I can't tell you how I spent my time, and I really don't want to go back to that. That's not how I want to live. That's not where I want to live. So that's part of the reason for this video, is just taking the time to think about it and process and try to come up with a plan and reflect on how I got there. Because I would say that there was an element of depression last week. But something I just learned recently, which is part of my conclusions, I might shed some light on this too. So ending the week and being able to work on the yard, having the energy to do that, and being able to go for the walk in Walmart was promising and helpful. And at this point, my conclusion is, or some of my conclusions are, one, I'm going to continue. I haven't stopped, but I'm continuing the Lumen program. Once again, paying more attention to the overall calories, not just the macros. And I'm going to give it a couple weeks because obviously coming off of a vacation, if nothing else, I'm not eating vacation food. So I should lose some weight, and tracking it well. And I should see some difference in the next 2 weeks. And if I don't, then I'm going to try to reach out to my doctor and find out if there's a dietitian that my insurance pays for, and try to get an objective perspective on the situation, because obviously I'm not objective on this. But this is really also highlighted that I need to rethink my understanding and approach to rest and the purpose of movement, and just overall, which I often do, is thinking about my priorities in life and fulfillment in life and those sort of things. I just recently found a video, and a lady was talking about tracking her energy. I'll link it below if you're interested. It's an excellent video. And it's interesting because I've heard of people talking about mood tracking, and I've tried doing that sometimes, but probably half, if not more of the time, when I'm trying to pinpoint my mood, it always comes out as I'm tired. And tired is not necessarily an emotion. It's an energy state. So I've always had trouble tracking my emotions, but the idea of tracking your energy seems promising. And the basic idea is multiple times a day you check in on your energy and you rank it on a color system, and it should clue you in on what things would be good to be doing at the time, and help you give yourself grace when you have low energy, and seek activities that actually give you energy back, so that you're not constantly pouring yourself out until you're empty and then having to stay empty for a long time before you can recover. The idea of working, burning out, and then working, and burning out. And that's a whole cycle of that, which can describe me sometimes. So I'm very intrigued by that idea, because I think I can rank my energy a whole lot easier than my emotions. So I'm thinking about possibly doing that, or keeping that in mind. I think it's a nice idea to look at the activities in your life and say, okay, this gives me energy and this requires energy. Like, walking. It's not fun to start or easy to start sometimes, but by the end of it and afterwards, I gain energy from the activity. But it's also thinking back on my basic understanding of rest. I've known for a while now that I don't rest well, and I know part of it comes from my childhood, and my mom often, if I was resting, she would just assume, well, if you're not doing stuff, if you're not active, then you're depressed. And it became rest equals depression in my mind, which is not true. There is a difference between resting and there is a difference between depression. And for me, a lot of the times depression has to do with frustration and a lack of hope, and an inability of seeing things changing in my life. And there's times where just rest is necessary. I should not feel guilty for taking a nap if my body needs it. So I know I have a lot of thinking to do and a lot of processing to do in regards to understanding rest and having it in a healthy perspective. And in terms of movement, my desire to move and be moving cannot be completely tied and dependent on the outcome of that movement. So that whole thing of, well, I walked and I didn't lose weight, so then there's no reason to walk. Well, no. There's other reasons to be walking. There's other benefits to walking in the meantime, regardless of the outcome. So that's something I'm also thinking through, is trying to detach it. Obviously, there is outcomes that you want and outcomes you desire. But I remember a while ago, somebody was talking about, I think I was looking at YouTube creation and this sort of thing, and they're like, well, I don't track this because I can't control it, or I track things that I can control. So they might ultimately want, X subscribers and the income, etc. But because they can't control it, all they can do is track the things they can control, which would be showing up and making videos and being consistent, etc. So lots of thinking to do. Yeah. So that's how my last week went. 2 days of exercise and a lot of time of not feeling great and being exhausted. But I do think I'm coming out of it, and I can feel myself having the ability to process things more. Now, the challenge is to not sit there and say, I have to figure it all out. And if I don't figure it all out, then that's a reflection on my worth and all that fun stuff. That's not true. It's just, this week has highlighted some areas that need to be worked through and improved on and fleshed out, if you'd say. So, thank you for joining me for this long chat. I don't know what I hope comes from this chat, but I do thank you for joining in and giving me the opportunity to air out my thoughts and talk honestly about how this last week has gone. So, I fully hope next week will be better with more movement and less frustration. Until next time, I hope you have a wonderful day. In the meantime, feel free to like and subscribe.